Hello, this is a follow-up to our initial lecture for the Elements of Conflict Interaction module, part of the certificate in Constructive Conflict Management. I should mention at this time that we do have 3 modules, and it's possible to earn a certificate in Constructive Conflict Management by completing all 3. They must be completed in sequence, and I'll give you more information about that as we go along. You can also contact Elizabeth Hensiak, our program assistant, in order to get additional information about completing the certificate. But right now we're in Elements of Conflict Interaction, the first module, and I'm just completing the lecture that we started on Monday at our initial session. We were talking about a process for constructive conflict management. I think this is a good place to pick it up again. Oracle is the acronym for remembering the process. I find those very helpful as mnemonic devices, so I hope it will be helpful to you as well. Actually, I'm kind of happy with this one. It's one that I created that really does pull together what I think are the essential elements for understanding conflict as a process of communication and addressing it constructively through communication. And back to my son and his picture for just a moment. When I talked to you on Monday, I said, I just like this picture. I'm just going to throw it in there, and I had no other good reason. But I thought about that a little further, and I actually do have a better reason. It's that look of optimism. It's that look of hope. It's that childlike sense of wonder and openness that I think is a great attribute that we can keep and cultivate throughout our lives, and I think can help fuel this positive approach to conflict management, hence constructive conflict management. So there you go, there's my justification. Let's quickly review some of the elements of nonviolent communication, but also the other elements of the first step. So here we go. Oracle, the first 2 letters are O and R, observing and reflecting. This is about being open, taking in more information from our environment. The practice is mindfulness. It's also sometimes referred to as beginner's mind, a kind of openness and resilience and compassion that we bring to our environment when we are fully in our bodies and expressing our best selves. A perspective for mindfulness is the 8 C's. Before I go into the perspective, I'll remind you that the definition of mindfulness, very strict definition, but a very good one and a good one to remember, is that by Jon Kabat-Zinn, who says that there are 4 elements to mindfulness. That is, paying attention to the present moment, on purpose, non-judgmentally. So it's about focused attention, but also an open awareness, taking in information, not screening it out, not getting into a dualistic us versus them or good versus bad mindset, simply taking in information. The perspective that we can bring to mindfulness, I referred to as the 8 C's, and this is from internal family systems theory. These are attributes of self according to that theory, not our ordinary tired egos, but the better parts of ourselves, our innermost selves, our best selves. And those attributes, you have a handout on this. I'll just remind you quickly of what those attributes are. Calmness, clarity, curiosity, compassion, confidence, courage, creativity, and connectedness. When we bring those sensibilities to our mindful awareness, then we're in a really good place to deal with conflict more constructively. One excellent practice from this position is something referred to as nonviolent communication, developed by Marshall Rosenberg some decades ago and developed by others. The goals are authentic connection with others and giving and receiving from the heart. The assumption beneath these goals is that the deepest human yearning is to give and receive love compassionately, and to be able to do that to the fullest extent possible. There are two ways, I've only expressed one in this slideshow, but I'm going to refer to the other to use this process. But the basic elements are the same in both ways. The process involves stating observations, feelings, needs, and requests. When you do it for yourself, you're expressing yourself honestly. When you do it for others, you are expressing empathy. So here's the process in 4 steps. You say, this is what I'm observing, using non-judgmental language. This is what I'm feeling. This is what I'm needing. And this is what I'm requesting. We've talked about the fact that not everybody enjoys talking about their feelings, and that's okay. You have to adapt to context and to relationship, but it is very important in terms of self-empathy, understanding yourself, to be able to describe or notice and understand your own feelings for your own mental health. And then, once again, that's a better place to be, a clearer place to be, in order to understand what needs are being addressed or not addressed, and where to go next in terms of addressing a conflict. Clarity about one's own feelings, needs, and goals is really essential. I'll be saying that again and again in our study of conflict resolution. Observing in nonviolent communication means talking about your experience without doing these things, without refraining from life-alienating forms of communication, not criticizing or using moralistic judgments or making demands. As J. Krishnamurti said, observation without evaluation is the highest form of intelligence. To just be able to talk about what's going on without praise or blame. To describe without exaggerating or generalizing. You never wash the dishes. You always give me bad conduct reports. You never listen to me. All of that doesn't fit here. Very unhelpful. The value of simply describing your experience without judgment or evaluation is that you open a space for understanding and joint problem solving. People will be more ready to join you in understanding you and partnering with you to come up with a win-win resolution if you can simply describe the problem without making it personal, without pointing fingers. In helping other people to understand your needs, if they're open to that, and if they're not, then in helping you to understand your own needs better, we talk about feelings. Unrecognized and unexpressed feelings can create problems with mental health, physical health, and can simply be corrosive in terms of relationships, more distant relationships, less effective organizations, because people are not invested. People do not feel that their needs are being understood or addressed. We distinguish feelings from thoughts. To distinguish a feeling from a thought is to be able to say, I feel sad, rather than, I feel sad that you're such a jerk. To say, I feel sad that you're such a jerk is sneaking in an evaluation, which is not consistent with this kind of communication and does not help build a bridge with the other. Another thought that sometimes somebody would confuse with a feeling might be, I feel disrespected. Well, that sounds like a feeling, doesn't it? It sure does, but it's not. Disrespected is a state of being, and it's got a whole package of assumptions about what the other person has done that is wrong. So there's blame packed into that I feel disrespected. What a really accurate feeling of statement of feeling would be I feel angry because when you came into the room shouting like that, my need for respect was not being met. I did not sense that I was getting the respect that I wanted from you, and so I was angry. It's a way of parsing out emotions and needs and the actions of the other person, and by separating them out in this way, it creates more of a space to look at it without blaming, without making essential kinds of connections that lock it all up into one ball that cannot then be effectively addressed. We distinguish feelings from who we think we are. It's not I am angry, but I feel angry. There's a difference. Distinguish feelings from how we think others behave toward us. Not you made me angry, but when you didn't do the dishes, I felt angry. Notice the difference. When you didn't do the dishes, I felt angry. When you left the dishes in the sink, I felt angry. That's effective. Ineffective would be, when I saw the dishes in the sink, when you left the dishes in the sink, you made me angry. You made me angry. Boy, that just leaves no room for any kind of understanding or collaborative work. It's blaming, it's shaming, and it's essentializing, because it makes it seem like this is inevitable and that you can be nothing but angry and that you are wholly angry. You have no other feelings about the situation. There's no room or space for something new to develop here. One way to get more refined in our description of our own feelings is to recognize that we often feel more than one thing at a time. We have multiple feelings, and that there's room for multiple feelings. And to build a vocabulary for our feelings so that we have a more refined sense of what we are feeling, and that we can describe that, if other people are open to hearing it, in a more refined way. This feeling wheel, which we looked at on Monday, breaks down some of the distinctions that we could go into. So, for example, let's go to a positive area, peaceful. And I'm choosing that one for the moment because it's a reminder that we can build relationships by acknowledging our positive feelings towards the other, so that when we do inevitably have conflict in a close working relationship or family relationship or friendship or with a significant other, we can have more social capital or more ballast or more of a positive sense of the relationship to rely upon, because we've also noted our positive feelings when possible. So just using the peaceful sector of this wheel for a moment, in the middle of the wheel is the primary or basic feeling, peace, peacefulness, peaceful. To break it down in a more refined way, if we are feeling content, looking at the next level here, that can be more specified by saying relaxed. Thoughtful can be broken down into pensive. Intimate can be refined into responsive, and so on. Some of these distinctions have, well, no, I think you get the idea. I was going to say something, but it really didn't make sense, so I'll leave it there. Needing is the next step. So first we talk about our observations. I noticed that you left the dishes in the sink. Then we talk about our feelings. I was angry. When I saw the dishes in the sink, I felt angry. Why? Because a need is not being met. So what is the need? Our needs or interests, desires, or goals are at the root of our feelings. Judgments of others are alienated expressions of our own unmet needs. This might be one of the most important points in the whole course, so I'll repeat it. Judgments of others are alienated expressions of our own unmet needs. We project onto others our hopes and fears, our desires, and when they are not met, the other person becomes a symbol or an object of our unmet needs, and that puts really an unfair burden on them. Other people were not put on this planet to meet our needs. Tough news, but we got to face that. So, and if we put that burden on them, if we hold them responsible, solely responsible for meeting our needs, then we're creating really not a good space for conflict resolution. If we want to punish them or control them, hey, no problem. It's not going to be a very positive relationship. No long-term gains to be met there in that kind of relationship. But if we want a positive working relationship, then what we really want is not to judge others for not having met our needs. If we express our needs, we have a better chance of having them met. So we can express our needs and own them as our needs. If we don't value our needs, others may not either. So we're not talking about squelching our needs or suppressing them or being quiet about them. We're talking about being vocal. We're talking about expressing them, but not holding the other person responsible for meeting them. We make requests, which is the next step. First, here's our list of needs, and this is not by any means a final comprehensive list. It's a starting point for thinking about fundamental human needs. The benefit of thinking about needs rather than positions is this. Take the dishes, my favorite example today. Take the dishes example. If somebody has left the dishes in the sink, you could say, my need is that you do the dishes. Well, that's actually a position. That's a specific strategy for getting a need met. Why does it matter to make this distinction? Because sometimes when we can state our larger need, it becomes more understandable as something that a human being has a right to, and not an attempt to control the actions of the other, but rather something more understandable, or to use a word that's in common use right now that I don't really like, but I'll use it, relatable. Okay, so when we talk about needs, we're talking more general terms about what's behind the position that we're taking. If I want you to do the dishes, or if I want you to follow through on your promise to do the dishes, then maybe I want to feel supported in taking care of the house and cleaning. So that would be under interdependence over here on the right. Maybe I want to feel connected to you. And if you don't respond to me, that's under empathy. Understanding that I'm stressed, I have a lot of work to do, and that's just one little thing that I've asked you to do. And you haven't responded to that through your actions, then I'm not feeling connected to you, and I'm not getting my need for empathy met. Well, let's just take those two for a moment. So just to understand that much within yourself can be very healing, can be very stabilizing, can put you on solid footing for knowing where you're coming from. You have your own goals in mind, and when you have your own goals in mind, you're much more likely to approach a conflict from a stable, clear place, and not an emotional place where you're out of control, where you don't know exactly what it is you're feeling or needing, but you know that you're upset. There's a real difference between knowing and not knowing. So having these words for your needs can be tremendously powerful and empowering. So let's say I need connection and I need cooperation. I see also under interdependence, and I need support. Once we've clarified our observations, our feelings, and our needs, we can move on to making a request. Using positive language, not you didn't do the dishes, but you left the dishes in the sink. That's what happened, right? I'm sorry, that's mixing up with observations. What I meant with positive language on requesting is not, we have to switch to a different topic here, not don't sit so close to me at the table, but I need space at the table. So would you mind, or I would like you to move your chair to the other side of the table so we can both have room. That would be an example of using positive language, what you're asking the person to do, not what you're asking the person not to do. Use clear, concrete action language. Make requests, not demands. Make sure the request was understood. Ask the listener to reflect it back, and express appreciation once they've shown they've understood and once they actually follow through on fulfilling the request, if they do so. There was something in here that I thought would be good to follow through on. Say a bit more about using clear, concrete action language, positive language. It'll come back to me. There's an art to making skillful requests. Let me just put it that way. So, continuing with Oracle, we've only gotten to O and R. Now we're into A and C, analyzing communication. This is my field. This is where I spend a lot of time thinking and analyzing, and it is a kind of analytic approach. But what it is basically looking at, all of these items you see there on the PowerPoint, are structures of communication. If we understand communication, as we said, as a way of making and doing things, a way of telling stories, making the world coherent, and coordinating our actions with other people. So two things to keep in mind here. Language or meaning, they're very closely interconnected, and social interaction, how we coordinate our actions with other people. So one thing we can look at when we're just trying to understand, this is kind of, if you get good at it, you can do it more and more in the moment. A lot of times it's 20/20 hindsight, but you know what? That can be okay if you get the realization fairly quickly after the fact and are able to use the information before it's too late. Not always possible, but good to be able to do. So the first thing, sequences and patterns of interaction, is recognizing how things typically go, or how thinking about how things will go if you say something or don't say something. And one thing that conflict research has shown is that the initial steps of any conflict interaction really set the tone very strongly. John Gottman's research on couples shows he could tell in his recordings of married couples within the first minute of a disagreement that he recorded whether or not this couple was going to divorce. And he was right practically 95% of the time. He was able to tell whether a couple was going to divorce or not by just listening to the first minute of their interaction. So what's going on within the first steps of an interaction? People are listening or not listening. People are jumping into those positions of criticizing, defensiveness, stonewalling, and contempt very quickly in a dysfunctional interaction. But in a positive interaction, the initial moves are more thoughtful, careful, open-ended. Listening is involved, respect is involved. Under stories, it's the stories that we tell ourselves and that we speak out loud to others, that we construct with others. Those stories are very powerful because they create frameworks that then we live within and then we act out of. They become kind of self-fulfilling prophecies. So if I tell a story about my conflict in which I'm a victim, then I will be a victim and I will act out of the role of victim. And that's not really a helpful or healthy role to be stuck in. It doesn't give you a lot of power. It perpetuates a kind of negative future for you and the others that you're involved with. So a story about yourself as victim, where it might be tempting to go there because it feels like you're taking care of yourself, actually is not the most effective way to recognize that you've been harmed, even if you've been harmed. There's a technical sense of the word victim, which we recognize in police work and in psychology, but in the everyday stories that we tell about ourselves in conflict, to see ourselves as a victim and to act as a victim, not a good place to dwell. Or to see ourselves as the bad guy or gal, to see ourselves as a persecutor, or to be locked into any other role, even that of a rescuer, can be very limiting and can lock us into an identity that itself becomes a source of conflict. The story that I told you about my work in the prison, I've noticed that if I become too identified with a sense of myself as a rescuer, as a hero, as the one who knows, as the one who helps in that situation, an attachment to that very apparently positive identity can in itself be a source of conflict, a source of blindness and a source of conflict. So stories are very important, and what we need to do is understand that the stories that we tell are not the only possible stories, to have a deeper sense of mystery, to hold our stories lightly, and to be more open to what actually happens when we're in interaction with others, and to tell the stories that are inclusive, that include others' perspectives, open our own stories to include multiple points of view, and a positive future orientation and a sense of hope and progress. These would be attributes of stories that will be helpful in conflict interaction. Framing, for example, the other person is a character in our story, framing them as a potential partner rather than as merely an antagonist, but framing them as a fellow human being rather than as mad, bad, sick, crazy, or lazy. These are the stories that help us to act more effectively in conflict. Looking at the third item here, systems, seeing more broadly how what we call the ripple effect of our actions, our words, and our actions in conflict situations. Seeing how we're connected, seeing the feedback loops between our actions and words, and the effect this has on others, and how this comes back to affect us. What goes round comes round, as they say. The next item, hierarchies of meaning, we're going to go into in a little bit more detail, so I'll come back to that. Logical force, let me just say for hierarchies of meaning, this is how we make sense of the world through framing our interaction at multiple levels. Logical force is about the sense that once we've attributed meaning to a situation, we feel a certain, sometimes, compulsion to act in one way rather than another, or force. That's the logic of our meanings. It compels us sometimes to act in one way rather than another. Strange loops are when we see things in black and white terms and we bounce back and forth between two, sometimes mutually contradictory positions. An alcoholic, for example, will say, I can control my drinking. And then when they go through another bout of drinking and getting ill or acting out in some horrible way, they look at what they've done and they admit they can't control their drinking. Then they stay off the bottle for a while. They feel better. Like, I can just have one drink. And then they go back into the tailspin again. So this oscillation between I am an alcoholic, I am not an alcoholic, for example, or I can control my drinking, I can't control my drinking, becomes a problem. What is needed in that case is some move beyond duality, beyond a strict either or mentality, understanding your experience from a larger frame where from that position, you can see that two apparently contradictory things can be true, but you need a larger understanding in order to have a more productive approach to your problem. In the case of an alcoholic, it often is simply admitting that I am an alcoholic, recognizing a higher power, and understanding that where sometimes you maybe deal better with your drinking and other times you don't, that you'll always be an alcoholic. So because it's a chemical thing, it's a condition, it's a disease. Once that is understood, you don't have to worry about I'm a good person versus I'm a bad person. Just because being an alcoholic doesn't mean that you're a bad person. It just means that now you see this apparent contradiction and ping pong game you've been playing with yourself between I can control my drinking, I can't control my drinking, can be resolved through these larger frames of I am not in control of everything. I'm basically a good person, but I am an alcoholic, and so I have to be careful. And in fact, I can't take one drink because the danger is just too great for me to fall back into that pattern again. And then the last item here, bifurcation points, is a borrowing from complexity theory in quantum physics. And it's the idea that in some situations, in many situations, when we're looking at a pattern of interaction, we can look at a choice point in that pattern of interaction, one interpretation versus another, or one action versus another, and just see how consequential that choice is. An apparently small choice of language, using a respectful word versus a disrespectful word, for example, can have magnified effects. You've heard of the butterfly effect, perhaps, in conflict chaos theory, which is about how the supposed beating of the butterfly wings in one part of the world can contribute and be actually a cause of a hurricane in a distant part of the world sometime later. Whether you take that literally or not, there is something to that. And bringing it back down to the level of human interaction, very small choices can have outsized effects and can pull us far in one direction rather than another. An entire marriage or reputation or organizational strategy can be destroyed in a moment by a seemingly small choice, and vice versa. A seemingly small choice can have outsized good effects. Um, the beginning of a beautiful relationship, the launch of a fantastic working team can happen because one person decided to call another person on a certain day and things got rolling. So recognizing, having a respect for the choices that we make are very powerful. Recognizing our own power, no matter what position we hold in an organization or a family, every choice that we make does have a potentially very large effect. And to think in those terms and think ahead of time about the possible consequences of our actions is part of analyzing communication. So looking for a moment at hierarchies of meaning, I'm going to put a hand up on D2L. I'll do it today, that will describe this hierarchy of meaning in great detail. Not all of the levels are shown on this map, but what we're talking about is how we frame our experience. And underneath episode, we have a couple of smaller levels. Act or action is under episode, and under that we have experience. Higher up, there's another level which I'll talk about in a moment. But just to say that when we have our experience of the world, we make sense of it at these multiple levels. At the level of experience, we perceive some things and not others. We focus our attention on some things and not others. We take in information in a particular way. When at the level of action, we interpret our actions and the actions of others in certain ways. If somebody puts a hand on your shoulder, for example, are they expressing empathy, or are they trying to control you, or is it sexual assault? Huge differences in those interpretations. Any one of them might be justified given the circumstances, but it's important to recognize that interpretation is involved. We are framing our experience. And when we think of communication in this way, as a process of framing our experience, then here are the questions we can ask of ourselves. One is, how are we framing our experience? Is that accurate? Is it inclusive of all the information that we have at our disposal? Is it the most helpful or productive frame for this experience and for moving forward? A second question we can ask is, are the frames that we have for this situation different from the frames that others have? What are their frames? Can we be open to and curious about the frames of others? That's huge in establishing any kind of meaningful relationship and also working through conflict. And another question we can ask ourselves is, what is our highest level of understanding, and is that the best level to be operating at in this circumstance? A lot of times when people get caught up in conflict, they get locked into the level of self. So they're thinking about their own face, their own dignity, their own rightness, their own survivals in some cases, and forgetting about or putting in second place the relationship. So think of these levels that are shown on this slide here as not fixed in their positions, but they can flip around. So self could be at the very top of this whole list. It could be even above mystery. And not all levels are in there at the same time. Somebody might not be aware of culture operating in a particular moment, even though it always is. If it's not in how the person is framing their experience, we leave it out because that's not how they're framing their experience. At the level of episode, it's the structure of the interaction itself. An episode is a recognizable sequence of interaction, like going out to dinner, having a meeting, playing a game of tennis. And episodes are structured in particular ways. They are located in particular places sometimes. Some people are included, some people are excluded. There's a certain expectation about the order of things, which actions are included, which are not in this kind of episode. There might be rules for the interaction, spoken or unspoken. When we have a conversation, How we understand the episode is extremely important. There's a difference between a discussion, a debate, and a dialogue, for example. A discussion, a debate, and a dialogue. Just take debate versus dialogue. Debate is about trying to win. It's about trying to get to the truth through destroying the other person's position and building up your own, whereas, and trying to persuade others, if you want to take a gentler look at it. Whereas dialogue is about understanding the other, giving equal weight to the other, and being open to being changed by the other. Very different from debate. So if you've got one person who's operating as if this conversation is a dialogue, and the other one is operating from their position as if it's a debate, there's a problem built into their interaction because they have different frames for the episode. Looking at relationship, this is the expectations we have for our relationships with others, whether they're formally described or not, the relative rights and roles and responsibilities that we have with others. Think about your relationships for a moment. There's one communication researcher who says that everything we say and do in relation to another expresses a basic attitude of respect or contempt. Respect or contempt. That's a strong statement, and it can sometimes be a useful one, I think, to take in looking at how we deal with others. Are we basically expressing respect or contempt in how we address another person in any given moment? And it's not only about our intentions, it's about how our actions are likely to be taken. That's important to acknowledge. How are we being seen? How is our message being received? So that's at the level of relationship. At the level of self, we're talking about our identity, our sense of our own worth, our sense of our own competence, our sense of our own likability or lovability, our sense of our own integrity, our values, all of these things. Our autobiography, are we living it out in the way that we believe? Our sense of our own capacities. So much can go into self. In interactions and in conflict situations, our sense of face, whether or not our self is being recognized, respected, and responded to, is very important. And there's an aspect of face in the research literature called negative face, which is not a bad thing. It's about giving people space. It's about freedom, the aspect that everybody needs a sense of freedom and control over their own lives, not being impinged upon by others, even if that impingement is a loving impingement. There's a saying that love without understanding is a form of violence. And that would be a violation of negative face. So if you want to think in simple, clear terms here about self, think about it this way. Everybody needs a sense of freedom, and everybody needs a sense of dignity. And a big source of conflict is when my sense of freedom and or dignity or yours is not being respected or fulfilled in our interaction. If it's being attacked or violated in some way, then we have a problem. And once again, this is a matter of perception. One person may not intend to disrespect another or to crowd another, but how it is perceived is everything. So very important. The level of culture is our most deeply held beliefs and assumptions, are the practices that are part of our community or group. Often these cultural patterns are invisible to us but operate very powerfully. Sometimes we're aware of them, sometimes we're not. The example that I gave in class the other day about different cultural assumptions about conflict management can be very powerful. So whereas I was taking the approach that nonviolent communication and all those steps would be a good thing for us in the prison setting, and sometimes it has been, in that case, a different cultural approach, which is more understood and more dominant in the prison setting, that of simply noting when one has been disrespected, apologizing, and then moving on, not examining feelings and needs, not going into that stuff. That is kind of the prison way most of the time. So if I'm the source of my conflict in that setting, one of the big sources was that I was coming at it from the cultural point of view that nonviolent communication was great. It was consistent with this value in open communication that is one dominant pattern in the United States. And these guys, at least some of them, were taking the position that no, a code of respect is the way that we deal with conflict, and that operates on very different principles. When we don't acknowledge the difference between the two different ways of doing things, it can be very confusing and very disorienting to be in conflict with somebody. Like, why are they talking this way? Are they crazy? Are they stupid? What's going on? Are they just being malicious? Well, no, they may just have a different cultural system that they're operating by. So it's important to be able to recognize that. Between the level of culture and mystery, we have something I noted as complex systems. And that's just noting broader and deeper forms of interconnection than may be immediately evident to the eye. So, for example, if I'm having a conflict with you, maybe my grandfather is in maybe my grandfather is in the room with us, even though he's not visible to you, and I may not be fully conscious of his presence myself. Now, I'm not getting mystical here. I'm just saying that we have relationships that can be very vividly alive within us, and that can be affecting how we act within a particular situation. Also, those relationships can certainly be impacted by our actions. So if I say something hurtful to you, and then you go and talk to our supervisor about it, now we have an effect that's spreading out, and that's going to come back to affect me in a certain way. Complex systems can go very far and deep. We can talk about the relationship of national or international politics to what's happening in a particular workplace setting or a family setting. So these connections can be very broad, very wide, very deep. To understand which ones are in operation in any given setting can be extremely helpful and valuable in terms of acting more mindfully and intelligently in a conflict situation. I can say more about that later. That one's a big topic for going into more deeply. And the final level here on this map is mystery. You see a big M mystery and a little m mystery. That's why we have the big M in parentheses. Little m mystery is just the unknown or the ambiguous in a given moment in an interaction. Like, I don't really understand what you just said. I don't know what you mean by love, or I don't know what you mean by respect, or I don't know what you mean by untime. Sometimes those little mysteries can be pretty easily cleared up. Sometimes they can't. Sometimes they're worth going after, and sometimes they're not. So recognizing those gaps in understanding, or those ambiguous or multi-leveled kinds of moments of meaning is helpful. But then the big mystery is just a deeper sense that human experience is ultimately mysterious and we can't explain everything. The example that I give in the handout that's going to be up on D2L is of 9/11, when the two towers were attacked in New York City, just to take that part of it. But also the Pentagon, obviously, and the Pennsylvania crash. The whole day, the whole series of events thrust a lot of people, especially those people on the ground in the midst of it all, into a sense of mind stopping in a way. Like these were completely unexpected circumstances. And in those circumstances, people were shocked into a recognition of their basic human existence, their basic need for survival, and their basic connection to others. All the distractions dropped away, and the ultimate mystery that we are just human beings on this planet. We're not so different, and that the main thing is to take care of each other and to love one another. That's what became so clear in that moment to people who rushed to the scene without a sense for their own safety, for example. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about big mystery, is that sense of openness, awe, humility, connection, and just spontaneous compassion that comes from a sense of our interconnectedness at a level beyond language. And we can go there. in a conflict setting. It is possible to go there in a conflict situation. And that's another level of meaning that we have here in the hierarchy. So please do take a look at that handout, which goes into all of this again and in some more detail. In some ways, it's a good review sheet. This is a big area for understanding conflict. I've pointed out some of the ways. Let me give you one further example before we move on. One common problem in a conflict setting is that one person holds the relationship as their highest level context, whereas the other person holds self as the higher level context. And that can make a big difference. I recall a situation when I was in graduate school where I had a friendship with one of my teachers, or at least I thought I did. It turned out to be a reasonably good friendship. But what was going on around our tennis games was very interesting. In relation to our tennis games, that would be the episode, he just wanted to have a good game of tennis. So his identity as somebody who needed some relaxation and somebody who is a good tennis player and needed a good game of tennis, that was predominant. A relationship with anybody who could fit in to the slot of reasonably good tennis opponent would be fine. So I was not special in terms of that relationship. I think perhaps you can see where this is going. For me, the level of relationship was higher in that I really wanted to bond with my instructor. And it really didn't matter to me what episode we enacted, whether it was tennis or chess or going for a cup of coffee or whatever. Myself was in there certainly, but it was in the case of spending time with my advisor, the relationship was the dominant thing, wanting to build that relationship. So that's interesting. Okay, so that doesn't matter in some ways unless we come to a point where those differing frames have an impact on how we interact with one another. And they finally did, in that after a few games of tennis, he could see that I wasn't really as challenging as a tennis partner as the kind of tennis partner he was looking for. And so he moved on. He found somebody else, and he spent his afternoons occasionally, playing tennis with somebody else. He did not make up that time by finding or working with me to find some other thing for us to do. So I felt a sense of loss in that the relationship had been degraded, or there was something missing now because we didn't have the time together. And for him, there was no loss because he wasn't invested to the same degree in the relationship. He was invested in having that time for R&R with a good opponent. So that wasn't really a volatile conflict, but it was a source of some confusion and anxiety for me at the time, and could have erupted into a bigger conflict. And certainly things do when people are framing things differently and people have differing priorities. So just thought that might be an interesting example. Here's then the review. We're down to the last pieces of Oracle. So we've covered observing and reflecting, analyzing communication, and now the last two pieces are learning, leaning forward, and evaluating the results. So L is learning and leaning forward, and E is evaluating the results. Learning is paying attention to the FIAC chain. What is that? That's how we frame things, affects our intentions, the goals that we set, and also how we interpret things, affect how we act, and how we act creates consequences in our environment. So looking at that chain and just seeing what kind of realities we're producing through our framing, our interpretations, our intentions, our actions, and the consequences we produce. This is a very powerful way of looking at ourselves as powerful agents, which we should look at ourselves as. So when we look at our frames, we can ask, how am I making sense of this situation? Intentions and interpretations. What is my goal? Action, what do I do and say to achieve my goal? Are there any alternative actions? That's a good question too. Consequence, how do others respond? So when we learn, we can think about, are there possible other ways of making sense of the situation? What difference would that make? Are my goals really clear? Are they my highest goals, or do I want to revise those goals? What about my actions? what actions are available to me? Have I really considered all of the alternatives? Am I limiting myself to too small a range of possible actions? Do I understand really what I'm doing, how it's perceived by others? And then consequences, really looking at the impacts of our actions and how others respond. It can be very powerful to look at ourselves in all of these ways. And then leaning forward means making changes, not just saying, oh, well, look at that. I learned something about myself, but then making changes based on what you've noticed, based on how you notice that you keep producing those negative consequences, or your goals don't seem to be realized, or how you're making sense of this situation is very egocentric or confused. Take a look at these levels and see what you can do to um, perhaps be more effective in your own life and in conflict interaction. And then finally, evaluation is ongoing assessment. Setting aside some time, you might write in a journal, you might talk to a therapist or a family member or a friend. You might go for a run and think about it on your run, but really, daily thinking about how am I doing? How am I doing? How am I doing? What did I do today and how did it go? What adjustments do I need to make? Really, that's the key to Oracle. And then going right back to observing and reflecting and just doing this again and again, really forever, to make this a lifelong learning process. And here's my old image of the aeration tanks at the Kenosha wastewater treatment plant. And the lesson here was that we can take everything, even caca, and make something good out of it. In this case, methane gas and biodegradable uh, products, fertilizer. And there's some of the results. I don't know if you can see in this slide, but they did a scientific study with the fertilizer created from the plant. And the plant to the far left, if I can read it correctly, yeah, okay, was given too much of the fertilizer and it killed the plant. On the right, the far right, the little pot there, the three in the front, was not given any and also did poorly. Even looks maybe a little worse than the one that was given too much. But the one that was given the recommended dose of the fertilizer, wow, it flourished. I think there's a lesson there for all of us. If I can not belabor my metaphor, but say that in converting our anger, for example, into energy that's positive and that we can use by looking at how it signals a need, an unmet need, and then using a process of nonviolent communication to more effectively address that need and doing it with intelligence, with the recommended dose, with not thinking that it can just work mechanically, but paying attention to the responses that we get from others, we can make our life flourish and our relationships flourish, just like that plant in the middle of this little group here. And once again, our final thoughts. Gunilla Norris, when we do not suffer who we are, others suffer for us. And my own quote, our choices of action and interpretation, moment by moment, serve to create the worlds within which we then must live. Thank you for listening. I'll see you online. Don't forget you can always email me with the silliest question or comment, and I love to hear from you. I'll also see you on the discussion board. Okay, see you later.